So now let's pull out the big boys. Simply put, I have been so busy lately and it's taken me forever to finish this part 3. I know from experience that you're going to run into a myriad of problems, technical problems, when doing a digital SLR time-lapse. And you're probably looking for the best quality. And I can't cover it all here, and I tried, but I think I just bit off too much to chew. So you should come over to timescapes.org. Tom Lowe started a really great message board. There's already a lot of really intelligent guys, very talented time-lapse guys hanging out there. Lots to learn. Tom also wrote an excellent guide on shooting night time-lapses with a digital SLR, and he covers a lot of information in that. I'll put that in the links, and I'll also put the timescapes.org forum link in my links, so check out the links for that. So with that said, let's get back to my ramblings on digital SLR time-lapse. Again, sorry for the delay, and I know I forgot something in here, so join us at timescapes.org.
Yeah, man. If you dedicate your life to the sweet, pick the apple when it's ripe, but don't eat. And when you eat, you can be sure. Time that you've enjoyed, may the sweetness more than pure, and your joy will be assured even more. Alive for the sweet. A picture at its fullest resolution.
Before I talk about the digital SLRs, let's just talk about the fact that you can do time-lapse with a huge variety of cameras, especially if you're willing to tether them. In other words, connect them to a computer or a laptop. For all you Canon fans out there, there's a couple of options. You have the GB time-lapse software for tethering, and that will work with just about any Canon camera, as well as Breeze Systems Camera Control Pro or something like that. Canon also has the TC80N, which is very similar to the Nikon MC36, which is an external triggering device. These guys plug into the camera and will do intervals down to 1 second. Or use something like the P-Clicks or other shutter timers. With the Nikons I have, you'll get 1000 frames on the firmware, but with the Nikon MC36 you can get unlimited frames.
Yeah, man. If you dedicate your life to the sweet, pick the apple when it's ripe, but don't eat. And when you eat, you can be sure. Time that you've enjoyed, may the sweetness more than pure, and your joy will be assured even more. Alive for the sweet.
But keeping with cameras, let's move on. We're jumping up in price and we're jumping up in size. Big time. I haven't jumped on a D300 yet at $1,800, but I still love my D200. And with the D300 out now, the price is dropping on them. You can get them new for $1,300, or you can get them used for anywhere between maybe $700 to $1,000. The D200 has the same intervalometer, interval timer function as the D2H, that being 1 frame per second and 1000 frames. Again, you can use the MC36 connected via the 10-pin connector to get you unlimited frames.
Yeah, man. If you dedicate your life to the sweet, pick the apple when it's ripe, but don't eat. And when you eat, you can be sure. Time that you've enjoyed, may the sweetness more than pure, and your joy will be assured even more. Alive for the sweet. A picture at its fullest resolution.
So let's get back to the whole shooting manual thing. One of the most common questions I get is, I set my camera completely manual. I lock down the aperture, I lock down the exposure, and I lock down the white balance. And we're not changing throughout my sequence. But yet I still got slight variations in my footage. From what I understand, this comes from the fact that on these cameras, each time it takes a frame, it actually dials the aperture down. So while it's paused, the aperture is wide open, but when it goes to take the shot, it dials the aperture down. The slightest variation in that aperture causes that slight variation in exposure. This is to say, mechanically it can't get it precisely to the exact same spot every time. There's two solutions to this. One is in the lens, the other is in post. In terms of the lens, one solution is to shoot wide open. In this way, the aperture doesn't close and the variations are reduced. The other way is to go with older glass. If you're like me, you remember back in the day when you physically turned the aperture dial. Newer lenses either don't have an aperture dial, it's not even there, or you lock it down and the camera dials the aperture every time. If you use older glass, you can dial that aperture to a certain spot and it physically stays in that position versus closing each time. But if you're like me, you have a lot of lenses that you love, and that's not always possible. So you can do it in post as well. My favorite post-process filter is GB Deflicker that works on Adobe After Effects. If you have slight variations, this will pretty much eliminate them. There's a lot of cases where in the scene the light is going to change more than your sensor is going to be able to capture, and so therefore shooting manual will limit the amount of time that you can capture. A perfect example of this is a sunset. The dynamic range from evening to sunset changes dramatically. So you're faced with a conundrum. Shoot manual, you'll get very consistent frames and consistent time lapse, but the amount of light in the scene will surpass the sensitivity of your digital sensor. One solution is to allow the camera to vary the exposure. That is, to keep the white balance locked and the aperture locked and let the camera determine the exposure time. In other words, aperture priority with your white balance locked. I guarantee you'll get variations with this approach. And in post, GB Deflicker used in Adobe After Effects will take a lot of that out, but it might not get it all. Generally, two things that will help with an aperture priority time lapse are to cover the eyepiece so that you won't get any light spillage in to mess with your meter, and to use matrix metering. In other words, use the entire frame to meter. But that's not a hard and fast rule. Sometimes center weighting your metering given a scene where the least amount of variation is going to happen in the center of the scene will get you better results. This is where a little bit of experience will come into play. And frankly, luck. Sometimes you get lucky with this approach, sometimes the variations go out of control. But in all cases, I highly suggest that you lock down your white balance. And this can be done by using a preset. In other words, the sunny, shadows, incandescent, etc. Or by doing an exposure-based set. I'm a big fan of the Expo disc. This is a simple disc that you place in front of your lens and preset your white balance to the scene